This is Andrew DiBasciago, and you're listening to Unknown Origins Radio.
We live in a world filled with the unknown.
You can't handle the truth.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
We will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight.
Welcome to Unknown Origins Radio.
And good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Unknown Origins Radio here on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Mark Johnson, and joining me is our co-host, Mr. Bruce Pearson. How are you doing tonight, Bruce?
Excellent, Mark. How are you?
You sound so good.
Well, don't push your luck. Let's hope it remains that way.
Yes, I know. We know how Skype and our internet connections love to tease us at times. But
precisely.
Well, we're looking forward. We got a great show tonight. We have a guest that I've literally been, hounding and stalking for the last several months trying to get on the show, and I think he finally agreed just to shut me up. So we'll be introducing him in just a few minutes. In the meantime, Bruce, how have you been? How's your week been?
It's been a little hectic. Been in the studio shooting on other network shows, and as you well know, it's pushing it a little close to get back home here at the studio in time. But we cut it right down to the wire, probably giving Keith a little bit of gray hair. But it's been busy, so that's good. Getting ready to go out to the National Association of Broadcasters Convention in Las Vegas in a couple weeks. And by the way, we've got a pretty interesting event coming up just before we head out to Las Vegas, and that's the New Jersey UFO Conference is coming up again here in the beginning of April. So we should probably give that a quick chat. What have you got on your agenda that you wanted to talk about before we get to tonight's guest on board?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the New Jersey UFO Council. I once again, I won't be able to make it. I will be in Disney World. Yes, I know life is rough. Yeah, the family vacation. So we'll be in Disney World that week. So unfortunately, I'm going to miss another one. Poor Dave Stennett. I keep promising him I'm going to come, and then I keep missing him. But hopefully I can catch the next one in the fall. Because, it's so close, and it's a great time to go there. If anybody in the area, if you've never been to one of these events, they're a great event. A lot of good speakers come in and talk. Dave puts on a class act show.
Yeah, that's the 11th. If anybody's in the Mid-Atlantic region, it is well worth the trip. It's a one-day event, April 11th. It's a full day of activities. You get to meet and greet the people up close and personal that are speakers. Of course, Travis Walton's going to be there from Fire in the Sky. Dave Roundtree, who is a good friend of our show, and we're working together on expanding the concept of data logging as a way to push the investigation of the unknown forward. Karen Dolan is going to be there. Shannon Taggart. Go to the njUFOC.com or get a hold of us here at Unknown Origins Radio. We'll help you get in touch with the right people and get tickets. But I can assure you that for the money, you can't beat this one-day event. So I say that because we'll be down there taping it. We might be streaming this time. But in any event, get down there and meet the people, and now you can go out to dinner with the speakers and so on. So it's a great day. I really recommend it to anybody that's interested.
Fantastic. And then, of course, coming up in June, and I have to keep plugging this one, we have Phenomenology 107. This is the 7th year that the event has been featured, and, every year it's been in Gettysburg. This year they're just going to be outside of Gettysburg in a new venue in York, Pennsylvania, and that is going to be June 18th through the 21st. And once again, if you've never been to Phenomenology, it is one of the largest paranormal conferences on the East Coast, held every year by Dana Wingard from the Northeastern Paranormal Investigations, and they really get a great lineup of people. I mean, this year we have, they're focusing on extreme haunting cases. So you have Bill Bean will be there, John Zaffis, Andrea Perrone, Chip Coffey, our good friend Eric Altman, Brian Cano from Scared, Bob Christopher, will be there, and so many more people. Chris Nicoletti, Dustin Perry from Ghost Hunters, and even Christopher Quarantino from also known as Christopher Lutz from the Amityville Horror, one of the original Amityville children. It's really a great event. They have many speakers. The big vendor room is always a blast. You get to go in and meet everybody, all the paranormal people, and they have investigations and things to do for the kids, and they have the parties in the bar and the nights and the weekends. So it's a really great time. So for tickets, you can go to Phenom Events, that's Phenom with PH, phenomevents.com, and you can get more information, hotel, lodging information, and tickets. So we would hope to see you there. And I think it's time for us to get right into the meat of the show tonight. What do you think?
Well, yes, we have a very unique guest tonight. We appreciate the fact that he's agreed to come on with us. I found out about our guest listening to his original radio interviews with Art Bell. With Art, of course, having him on a number of years ago when the story broke, and Art, I know, had him on several times to move the story forward. So we really appreciate him taking the time and being willing to come back on the air with us. So I'll let you do the formal introduction, but it should be a very interesting show for our listeners tonight.
Well, we'll get right into it. We'll introduce Dr. Jonathan Reed as our guest tonight. Dr. Reed has had a very fascinating story to tell. As Bruce mentioned, he's told it on Art's show a number of times, and I'm very pleased that he has come on the show to talk with us, and we'll go a little bit deeper tonight too, deeper into what's been happening since the events as well. So, Dr. Reed, please welcome to the program. How are you tonight?
Very good, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. And I just also want to mention that you are also the author of your book about your encounters, Link, An Extraterrestrial Odyssey, The True Story of Alien Contact. And, you wrote this book quite a few years ago, back in 2000, I believe.
Yes, it was published in 2000, and the actual event happened in October 15th of 1996. In Washington State.
Now, we had talked before the show about what we wanted to talk about, for the show tonight. I know everyone who knows your case is fascinated by it, and I would like to go into what you experienced those days. And then, of course, we have 2 hours here to go in to what's been happening since you wrote the book and the other experiences that you've had. So, could you just start off for our audience, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what happened that led up to these events?
Sure. This thought, like I said, it all happened back in 1996 when I was a clinical psychologist, developmental psychiatrics, child development for the University of Washington Medical Center. And what happened was I had a golden retriever, a 7-year-old great dog that used to go with me everywhere. And I used to take her for walks by the water and into the forest. And one of the days, nice, beautiful October afternoon, I decided to play hooky and take my dog basically 60 miles east of Seattle, which is near the Snoqualmie Pass mountain area. And it's full of logging roads and good places to walk, and we'd done this many times. So what had happened is basically I parked my car off of one of these logging roads that I had done many times before, and we just started walking and down the trails and through the woods, and it's a beautiful, pristine national forest. Not like in the city. This is definitely the mountains. And we walked and we saw squirrels and raccoons and all kinds of stuff. And, of course, you can let your dog run in this kind of area where you don't have to have them on a leash and they can do all kinds of fun dog stuff. And my dog was pretty well obedient. She would come when I called her, and then she'd take off running through the woods, and nothing unusual. But after we'd been walking for about an hour, she took off and out of sight, and I heard her barking, which was, again, nothing unusual. But all of a sudden, her barking tone changed, and it sounded a little bit more aggressive than normal. And, sometimes dogs will find, like I say, a squirrel or something and go scampering after it. Well, this barking continued, and it started to sound more aggressive, and at times even like she was being pursued. And so I called her several times, yelled out loud her name, Susie, and normally she would come back, but this time she didn't. And the barking continued, and it was going farther away. So I quickly took off my backpack. I had a day pack with me, and held it in one hand and grabbed a branch in the other in case I had to untangle her from some kind of critter. This mountain area has, like I say, raccoons, and we'd seen a deer earlier in the day, and even bear are in this area. So I wasn't sure what she was involved with, but I considered that I better have something to, kind of untangle her when I found her, because I could hear this barking changed. And so I ran up ahead as far as I could, getting closer to her barking sound, and I could hear that she was very close in the underbrush, but I couldn't see her. And what I did was I kind of ran up and jumped kind of down through into a little thicket, and found myself face to face with this vibrating thing that had a hold of my dog, or my dog had a hold of it. I wasn't sure at the second. And what I saw was a small, blurred, vibrating like a paint shaker thing holding my dog by what looked like the mouth or the neck, vibrating even her, just so I couldn't even barely see the outline of her. But it looked like there was some kind of, massive distress going on, and she was yelping. And this all happened within seconds. And as I looked at it, it stopped vibrating for a second, glared at me, and then tore my dog's head in half, and splitting her back and her body apart. Blood, everything falling to the ground in front of me. And all I could think of was stop and rage and to put an end to this. And the branch that I had picked up, I used as a weapon. I hit it as hard as I could, hoping to kill it. And it fell to the ground as I struck its head.
And I've read the same account in your book, and I've heard you tell this story on a number of occasions. And what strikes me about the encounter is the fact that this being was vibrating in such a way. It makes me wonder, what if it was using some type of cloaking technology and was invisible, but the dog was able to sense it? Maybe you would have walked by it and not even known it was there, but because she attacked it, and you said both her and the dog, her and the creature were vibrating together. Maybe. Well,
during the last 18 years of having to talk about this with many, many different people who are probably much more knowledgeable in this area than I am, we've come to a conclusion that it was probably trying to escape and/or shift dimension, that it was actually trying to disappear. And the possibility that my dog just happened to get to it at the right time, otherwise I would have never seen it. It would have never been there, most likely. It's a speculation, but it's something that a lot of people have put a lot of thought into. Other people have had creatures vibrate and then disappear. So this is where this information is coming from.
If I may jump in here, did you
Yes,
sense Yes. Did you sense anything non-auditorily? Did you sense any communication of any type from this being at all?
What I sensed was right before I jumped down into this little thicket in front of it, I felt a pain go through my head like a massive migraine. And then once I struck it, it stopped. Everything kind of stopped. And as my dog fell to the ground, it just kind of dissolved into herself, into kind of a white ash. And the body of this little creature lay on the ground with a hole in its head from where I had struck it.
There was no sign of any liquid or any blood, if you will? Oh, yeah,
there was blood all over from it and from my dog.
And the flow of that ceased as it would be with a human body or a mammal or at some point, or did it continue to ooze blood, or was there any?
Well, there was a substantial amount of blood on the back of its head, and
I see.
There are pictures of this.
Right, I've seen the pictures.
It didn't, it wasn't like it had cut an artery where it was pumping and flowing, but a head wound has a tendency to seep a lot of blood. It's very vascular, even in humans. So all I can assume at that moment was that I killed it, and I had hoped I did because it had killed my dog, and I figured I was next. And again, this was all within, 4 or 5 seconds of landing on the ground and just reacting.
How far did you have to advance before you hit the creature?
About one step forward, about, say a half a meter.
So,
I was face to
So you were
with
very close when you came upon it?
Yes. And what I hit it with was like a baseball bat.
Well, that would do it. Certainly, there's enough power behind a swing with a baseball bat to cause some serious damage.
It broke its skull open, and there was actually bone and tissue.
Is there a current website where the listeners could just shoot over to your website, and are there any pictures available that they could look at now as we speak?
Either up and down Facebook or also on a website that some people put up, which is an older website, and that website is ODISEALINK, and that's OdysseyLink.com. And that's actually in Spanish.
Now, could you discuss, there was a craft associated with this being also?
Well, right after I hit this thing, it fell to the ground, and so do I, with a crippling sickness, almost a paralyzing sickness. I couldn't barely move. I couldn't stand up. I lost control of all my bowels and my bladder, and I was hyperventilating at the time, and I figured I was probably going into shock, but I didn't know, but it felt like something was compressing my chest. So something happened the second this thing hit the ground to where I felt it. My body was feeling something pushing on me, penetrating my body. So I literally crawled on my hands and knees for what seemed like eternity until I heard a sound. I heard a sound that was like a low ebbing vibrational tone, really a low tone. And I thought, well, maybe it's another hiker. Maybe they have a radio or some kind of boombox or something. And I looked around and I couldn't see anybody. And then I fell back down to the ground and I'd crawl around and I'd hear this sound, and it was almost scratching at my mind. And again, I felt like somebody else was there, but there wasn't anybody there. And as I kind of pushed my way around 10 to 20 feet from this body, I stood up and I could see what looked like kind of a mirage through the underbrush. There was a lot of underbrush in this area, and it was a pretty dense tree canopy, so it was kind of a dark, woodsy area. But nevertheless, I could see this, what looked like a mirage, where the light bends a little bit, and there was something there, something that didn't look like a tree or underbrush, something black. And so I kind of made my way toward it, thinking, I don't know, maybe it's a camper. And I was grabbing at anything I could just to control my breathing and to not pass out from exhaustion. And I pushed through the brush, and I actually fell against kind of a hard surface. And as I did, it was freezing cold, and it actually kind of burned my hand like dry ice would burn your hand as I pulled away from it. And it was a black, diamond-shaped object that I ended up calling in the book we wrote the obelisk. It was approximately 10 to 12 feet long, 3 feet high, and about 2.5 feet wide. Cut like a diamond. No seams, no windows, no landing gear, and it was about 3 feet off the ground, which defied everything I could imagine. But nevertheless, that's what it was. And as I touched it, it was making this vibrational tone, this low ebbing sound. And as I touched it, the tone changed. And it became more pleasant sounding, more welcoming. And again, I fell to the ground, sick, throwing up, unable to get up, unknowing what I had become involved with. I mean, everything I was looking at defied everything I believed in. I was never into science fiction. I was not into UFOs or aliens. I mean, I was a doctor, a serious doctor. And if I didn't see it, smell it, and know about it, I wouldn't believe it. So this was not my forte. This was not my area of study. And none of this made any sense. This whole arena at this point made no sense to my way of life and understanding. The sound of the air had even changed. The feeling of the ground was sticky and almost like when I'd go to move, it was like moving through water. But there was no water. There was just this silence and thickness in the air that just, was totally out of my paradigm.
Did you sense any odor either around the being or around this craft, if you will, during this time?
Well, the whole area, the second I hit it, this creature, and it fell to the ground, everything changed. The density of the air changed. The smell of the air, it smelled musty and old. The creature itself had a smell like rotting fruit. So as I moved away from that, that was more pleasant to be away from it. The craft, or whatever you want to call this black floating object, had no smell, but it was freezing cold. And like I said, there was a tone or even a presence of intelligence to it that I couldn't define, I couldn't fathom. But nevertheless, it was there, it was happening, and I just felt like I was either going to go into complete shock or even die because of the way my body was reacting to everything. So the only thing I could think of was survive. And I thought, okay, I've got to rest, I've got to calm down, I've got to quit hyperventilating. And I knew that in my pack, right before I had crossed this little ridge and kind of jumped in front of my dog, I had set my pack down, and my pack had water in it. And I thought, I've got to get some water. I've just got to drink water. I've got to calm down. I had, been throwing up for about an hour, so I was definitely dehydrated. So I went and tried to find my pack and go back up about 25 feet from where this object was. And I got my pack and I started looking for the water, and I pulled out my camera and took all my camera and other things that I had in my pack out to find the water. So I found the water, I drank the water, and I leaned against a tree, and I kept thinking to myself, none of this is happening. None of this can be happening, because it just defied everything that I had ever come to believe was possible in my life. And as I drank the water, I realized, okay, I've got a camera. I've got a camera because I took pictures, as an amateur photographer. So I thought, okay, I'll take a picture. And probably nothing will be there, because maybe this is all an illusion in my mind. Maybe I'm suffering from some kind of grand seizure. And so my whole methodology was to pick up the camera because I was used to it, felt comfortable, and I decided I'd take a picture of what was in front of me, which was the body of this creature. And I took pictures. I took every bit of film I had. This was a 35 millimeter film camera. This is before digital photography. So this actually produced negatives. So I just want to make it clear that this was prior to Photoshop. And all of this came as kind of a comforting second nature thought. Not that I'm going to take big pictures and come out with something fantastic, but more as I'm going to take pictures and nothing's going to be there, and I'm going to find comfort in that. So that's what I did. I took picture after picture of the obelisk, of the body, of the area, and I took my video. I had a video camera, and I took video of the whole thing. And at times the video camera would distort, and I'd get angry. And you can even hear it on the recording of the video, because I thought of all times for this to start acting up is now when I want to record something. And so I did. I recorded it. I put it on video. I put it on in photographic slide film and negative film. And I drank water, and I thought, none of this is going to be true. None of this is the reality. And I kept talking myself out of it. I kept trying to deny that any of this happened, that something must have just happened to me. And I was afraid. I was sick. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to believe. I was alone, 60 miles away from what my life was really all about. And so I tried to survive. I tried to, minute by minute think, what can I do just to breathe slower, just to calm down, not to have a stroke or a heart attack. And I literally paced my breathing so I could slow down. And I thought, what am I going to do with this body? What am I going to do? I've killed something. And it was small, like childlike in size, not very big. And, I looked at it and I realized it's not a costume. It's not a mask. The blood, the sinew, the cranial material that had come out of its skull was real. And as I did this, I kept thinking, what have I done? What have I killed? Maybe I'm in trouble. And my mind just reeled on these many, many things, until finally I decided that I remembered I had a thermal blanket in my pack. And that's a kind of a mylar blanket that hikers and campers use in case there's an emergency for them to wrap themselves up to keep warm. It's a very lightweight piece of mylar, about 10 by 8 feet in dimension. And so I decided I'd cover the body with that. That was my rationale. So I spread it out and thought, well, I'll pile rocks around it to keep the animals away from it. Well, there were no rocks, because in this area of the mountains, it's high enough, it's almost at the end of the tree line, and there just isn't a lot of rocks that you can grab. And so I kind of pushed the thermal blanket under the corner of the creature and kind of wrapped it up like you'd put a sleeping bag or a burrito, kind of rolled it around it. I didn't want to touch it, but I didn't want to see it either. And I just rolled it up and thought, okay, it's covered up now. And I thought, well, maybe I can put it by the edge of the path, because there was a hill, kind of a hill, and maybe I can pile some branches on it to keep it from animals getting to it. And as I did that, I realized it was so light that I could literally pick it up with one hand. I mean, it was between 40 and maybe 50 pounds at the most. And again, this defied reason to me and logic, but nevertheless, there it was. And I don't know exactly why or what my logic was, but I thought, I've got to find a place to hide this, to secure it. So I picked it up in one hand, I picked up my pack and my other stuff in the other, so I was kind of balanced. And I just started walking back up the path to where I had parked my car, which was about an hour coming down to this point. So I had no idea how long it was going to take me to get back, but it was starting to get dark.
What did you think about the obelisk at this point when you were leaving it? Did you have any thought about it?
Well, I pushed on it, I climbed on the end of it, and it wouldn't move a fraction of an inch, not an inch. It was like it was anchored to the air.
And it was hovering at that point. There were no appendages or landing gear?
I had drug another big branch underneath it to try to see if there was something underneath it. And that branch felt like it was going into water as I went underneath the surface. And then as it would come up the other end, it would release. Okay. If you've ever put like an oar in the water.
Yes.
Right.
So there was a density underneath it that was not like anywhere else around it, but I couldn't move it. It wouldn't move.
In hindsight, and I know we could talk more about this later. We want you to continue your story, but the obelisk, do you feel it was a craft, or do you feel it was more of a toolkit?
Well, that's a question that has been asked to me, probably a million times. It wasn't, in terms of a craft, if you and I think of, a spacecraft like NASA, it wasn't large enough. But yet there were some other oddities about it. When I fell against it, for an instant, just for a fraction of a second, I got a flash in my mind like I was in a big black room. And
really? Interesting.
With something else in that room going, I'm here, you're here. And then all of a sudden being thrown back out like maybe I wasn't the one he was looking for. Maybe he was looking for the little guy that was laying on the ground 30 feet away.
He being the obelisk itself? The craft
the obelisk was intelligent and maybe a caretaker or toolbox of this little guy.
What about any sound?
Maybe it was a doorway.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but was there any sound emanating from the obelisk at all, or was
there was this low ebbing harmonic tone.
Okay, right, okay. And did that change when you put the branch under it at all? Was there any oscillation in it?
It didn't change the only time it changed is when I first touched it. And then it became more pleasant sounding.
Okay.
And from then on, it was the same. It never moved. It never did anything to reach out to me other than I felt this weird feeling in the back of my head like almost a scratching migraine headache coming on.
Now, you mentioned you tried to jump up on top of it. How did you manage that with this freezing cold property?
Well, I had a long sleeve shirt, like a flannel shirt on.
Okay.
And I just kind of lunged half of my body up onto it to try to push it.
Right.
And it wouldn't move. I mean, it was like a piece of granite anchored in the air. I mean, it had a density like stone.
And the color of it was almost
Black.
Onyx kind of a color, as in a
It
picture?
was black and had a little bit of a surface to it where you could kind of see beneath the surface.
Okay.
Almost like looking at fiberglass in resin.
Okay.
Or something like that.
And no markings, no
markings, no
nothing.
doors, no windows, no gaps, no seams, nothing.
Now, if I can ask you another question, obviously there was a need to try to preserve this being because of what happened to you. Did you give any thought about your poor dog that got itself ripped apart in this? And obviously you had to make a decision there, a value judgment, to either take your dog back to the truck or take this this newfound entity.
Well, I don't think you completely understood when I said my dog fell to the ground in a powdery ash.
Right. No, I understand that.
There was nothing left of her.
Okay, there was nothing to even gather up or...
No.
Okay, all right. That's what I meant. I mean,
just like soot from your fireplace.
And not enough as if you would have if you had a cremation or that type of residue.
Well, I'll tell you, at the moment, I wasn't thinking about that.
I got you. No, and that's
more about survival. And
Sure.
in truth, I was afraid what I had done. I was seriously afraid of this whole situation. Not clearly, logically thinking, other than, I didn't want to be in this place because I felt I was so sick that I didn't know I was going to be able to get out of there. And when I started walking back up this path, which, like I said, took us an hour to get to that point from my Jeep,
right.
all of a sudden I found myself back at my Jeep, like no time had taken place. Like maybe 5 minutes had gone by. And all I thought was, there's my Jeep. That looked good. That looked like more reality to me. So I walked up to the Jeep, opened the back end, and set this body in there with my pack, closed the door, and sat in the driver's seat for I don't know how long, and just numb, just breathing and hyperventilating. And I was a mess. I mean, I was a mess. And I looked over to where my dog always sat next to me, and she wasn't there.
Right.
And I knew something had happened. So my sense of the whole thing was almost not wanting to think about what really had happened, just thinking about trying to get back to something that looked or felt familiar, because none of this felt familiar, and there was no one around. So I was alone in this.
Well, I think that it might be fair to you to put this for our listeners, put this in context. It's bad enough if, and I spent many years as a first responder, to come in face to face with a traumatic situation where there's been this type of overwhelming trauma to deal with, whether it's an accident or whatever. It clearly will shake a normal individual up. And to be fair to you, one can only imagine, as we're all human beings, how completely overwhelming this situation could be. I mean, your whole understanding of the world around you is flipped on its ear instantaneously. Exactly. And accepting as a journalist, the validity and because you have photos and you have videotape, and I would like to ask you, do you still have those negatives and that material, that evidence intact? Okay. Based on the strength of that, I would ask the listeners to just try to put themselves in your position and understand how completely brain-numbing this would be to everything you understood an hour before, and how traumatic and psychologically debilitating this incident could be. And I say, as one human being to another, And physical, of course. I mean, you're sitting there vomiting and everything else. As one human being to another, I can only imagine what that was like for you.
It was insane.
It's kind of hard to keep your head strapped on straight under those conditions.
Absolutely. And that's why my mind, I believe, started to look for little tiny things that were familiar, just for comfort.
Right. Some anchor to your prior reality.
Exactly. And my mind kept thinking to myself, I've got to go home. I've got to get out of here. And then I realized there was a ranger station about 2 miles away. And I thought, okay, I'll drive there. That'll be good. I'll drive there. And so I drove there, got in my, was in my Jeep, drove there, got sick along the way, had to stop and throw up and regain some kind of composure to be able to slow my breathing down. And then I'd drive more. And I finally got to the ranger station and got out, and it was closed. I don't know where he was. I don't know if he was at lunch, but there was nobody to be found. So I just drank some water out of their hose and got back in my Jeep and basically headed for home, thinking comfort, home, reality, my reality. And that's what I kept in my mind until I found myself back, drove in my carport, and again sat there in the driver's seat in the carport for some time and looked in the rearview mirror. And I'm thinking, maybe none of this happened. But in the rearview mirror, I could see the thermal blanket that was wrapped around something. And I knew at that point something had happened. And my mind kept reeling from one point to another. Did I find my dog? Was my dog killed by a bear? Or did something happen that I couldn't bring to my mind to understand? Did I wrap up my dog and bring her home? And I didn't know. And I or maybe I didn't want to know because it didn't make sense. So I got out of the Jeep, I walked to the back, I opened the back of the Jeep, and I opened this thermal blanket and unwrapped it, and there was this creature, bloody with a hole in its skull, and I knew it wasn't my dog. And so I literally picked it up, walked into my garage, which was an external building from my house, and opened the door and thought, where am I going to put this? Where can I hide this till somebody can help me? And there in front of me was my old freezer, a big, deep freeze, like a coffin.
Chest type, right.
Yeah, and I walked over to it, opened the lid, didn't have a lock on it, and grabbed the basket that was inside of it because it really didn't have a whole lot of food in it. Took the basket out, set it on the floor, and just took the whole body and put it in the freezer and closed the door. And I just closed the door of the garage, walked in the house, and went and stood in the shower for I don't know how long. Just to clean my body, just to clean the mess that I was and try to regain some kind of composure. I mean, I was losing control of myself even emotionally at that point. And it just felt good to stand in the shower. It felt like, home.
Now, could you go back a little bit and describe for the listeners the specifics about the body? For example, did it have 2 legs and 2 arms?
It looked like a child. It looked like a small 7-year-old child. 2 legs, 2 arms. The arms were longer than a normal human's arms, very kind of spindly. It was wrapped in a dark black, if you can imagine, like a spandex suit with no seams, no buttons, no zippers, like almost tight to its neck, and then its head exposed. Its hands were covered with the same material, and they were like mittens. It looked like 3 big fingers.
3, okay.
Okay. on each arm, on each hand, and it had 2 legs, and it had feet that were covered in the same material. But it was all one. It was all one piece of material, like spandex or even a scuba suit. It was black, almost black and shiny. It felt a little bit oily, but yet there was no residue on my hands when I did finally touch it. We did do a topical examination a few days after I had brought it home, after I had called my friend and said, I need help, please come help me. And we were able to realize that its body was basically very similar to a human's body. It had ribs, it had all the same joints, arms joints and wrist joints and shoulder joints and legs and hips, all the same basic anatomy. I tried to cut the suit off of it with an X-Acto knife. My friend and I actually took the body out of the freezer and laid it on a table that I set up in my garage and tried to cut the suit. Well, it cut about 6 inches, and as soon as I pulled the X-Acto knife up, it sealed itself, just like a resealing material.
Wow.
And then I cut it again, and it did it again. And the third time I went to cut it, it wouldn't let me cut it. I could not pull the X-Acto knife down to slit the material.
Holy smoke.
Now, this was in 1996. About 6 years later, NASA came out and said, we've invented a new self-sealing fabric for our astronauts. Just a coincidence.
Yeah, coincidence. Right. When you pulled the body out of the freezer,
yes,
was it frozen or was it still pliable?
Well, it was semi-frozen. It was harder than it was when I put it in. Now, in day one, when I brought it home, I went back out after standing in the shower and cleaning myself up and talking myself out of believing that there really was this creature in my freezer. Again, I had comforted myself in saying, oh, it has to be my dog. It's got to be my dog. And I went back out, confident that my dog was going to be in the freezer. Well, again, I looked at it. It wasn't my dog. So I went in the house. I called some friends. I called my girlfriend who wasn't home. I called another guy who was a really good friend of mine, and I got him, and I said, I need your help. I need you to come over here. Susie, my dog had died, and I need help. I'm really sick. So he came over, talked to me, calmed me down, and I started to tell him the story, and of course he didn't believe me. He thought I was totally, out of my mind and hallucinating. And I said, okay. I said, then come to the garage with me. And so I took him to the garage, and I said, look, open the garage, the door to the freezer, and you look. You tell me what's in that thermal blanket. And he looked, and I believe he probably didn't breathe for almost a minute. And then we all both ran in the house and didn't say anything and just drank a bottle of scotch. And both of us were like, again, in denial and not believing what we had seen, what was really there. But after a few hours went by, he said, my friend said, I know what this is. And I'm saying to him, I don't know what it is, and I don't want to speculate. And he said, well, it's got to be some kind of extraterrestrial. And I said, I don't believe in that. I don't think so. And he said, well, yes, it is. It makes perfect sense. And he said, we got to do something about it. We got to call some people. We got to, and I said, well, you do what you have to do. I said, I can, barely get from here to the bathroom. And so that's how the process started. He started calling people, and trying to get somebody to come and look at it, trying to get somebody to come and help us. Because as far as I was concerned, I wanted to get rid of the whole thing. I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to be around it because I assumed it was making me sick. Because I was still sick, even at home, for almost 3 days. But nevertheless, I had people come to my house who I worked with, other doctors, other professors from the University of Washington that I worked with. 10 different people had seen the body during the first 2.5 days. And all of them said, it's incredible, it's nothing we've ever seen, yes, you need to do something with it, but most of them didn't know what to do. And a lot of them were afraid of what might happen if they got involved. And that's how we started doing what, if you want to call, research on it. On the third day, a fella who I worked with directly in the hospital, a friend, old-time friend, another doctor, I had called and said, please come over and take a look at what I found. And that's about all I said on the phone. And he was excited, and he said, sure, no problem. He had been over to my house many times. And about an hour before he was supposed to get there, I got a call from him saying, I'm not coming. I think you should quit this and get rid of whatever your concern is. And he hung up. So his tone totally changed. His attitude was nothing like he ever was before. And I was angry. I was angry. So I went back out to the garage to put away the table that I had got out and a light for him to look at it. And I heard this sound in the garage. I heard this scratching or rubbing sound like it was coming from underneath the freezer. And I figured, it's the compressor going out, because it was an older freezer. And I'd been opening and closing it, over the last 2.5 days. And so I figured, okay, well, if it's broken, if the freezer is broken, the thermometer on the inside will tell me the temperature is going up, and then I'm going to have to find somewhere else to put this body. So I took a look, I opened the door, and as I opened the door of the freezer, the creature sat up, uncurled itself, and screamed at me with such a velocity and such a volume that it literally pushed my chest against the wall of the garage.
So even with its head,
alive. It was totally alive.
Was the wound healed in its head at that time, or was it still an open gash?
For the last couple days, since I had been taking it in and out of the freezer to show people and to do this examination, I had taken a piece of duct tape and literally folded back the piece of skull, the piece of bone, with all of its connections and all of the skin on the outside of it, and just duct taped it back in place so that it wouldn't flop all over. And so the question remains, was it healed? I don't know if it healed, but I will say it was frozen in place.
Right.
And as it sat up and screamed at me, it was still duct taped to its head.
Jeez.
And at that point, I just ran out the door. I left the freezer open. I left the garage door open. I ran in my house and just almost cowered inside my house.
Wow.
Because I figured I'm next. It's coming to get me.
Yeah. I remember watching the video of the examination that you did of the creature. And I know that a lot of people you didn't notice it at the time, but a lot of people who watched the video did notice how the creature's eyes blinked at one point.
I will say, and again, we have to reference when this was. In 1996, I had an older high 8 video camera, which was one of the first smaller cassette video cameras made by Nikon, branded by Sony, I believe. But at the time, the viewfinder was this little tiny, up to your one eye to look through viewfinder, and it was black and white. just a little tiny half-inch square to look into. It wasn't like the view cameras of nowadays, where you've got this big screen. So I had to really stick my eye in the thing just to even kind of find what I was pointing the camera at. And I didn't realize that it was blinking. In fact, it's very obvious when you know what you're looking for after you've seen it, that it's basically playing possum. It didn't want me to know it was awake.
Could it that have been, or could it have been in a type of a coma where, there are people who are in a coma or even a vegetative state where their eyes open, they blink, they move, but yet they're still not fully conscious?
Well, any of that is possible. And there's one other thing that we have to take into consideration. There are creatures on our Earth that live with us that can actually survive and operate just on half a brain. And I don't mean that as a joke, even though there's some people that operate on half a brain.
Or less, in my experience.
Exactly. But no, seriously, we do know that there are some reptilians that can actually survive only with half of their brain functioning. We also know that in humans, if people are injured, severely injured with a brain trauma, that our human brain will actually try to relocate different sections of its memory and facilitate a new area to augment the damaged site, which is amazing when you really think about it. So to answer your question, I don't know if it was fully conscious. I didn't realize, if I would have realized it was blinking at the time I was walking over it with the camera, I would have been out of there. I would have been long gone.
I don't blame you.
Well, I think it's fair to say, though, it seems somewhat congruent that the fact that there was some association with this craft or the obelisk, and that was very cold. So therefore, since you placed it in a very cold environment, it's not hard to stretch some logical conclusion that may have been actually conducive to it remaining alive. Exactly. So,
sure.
I mean, that's...
And we also know that, like, for instance, penguins live their whole life at, 30 below zero. So we know that it's possible. We know that it's possible that a red blood air-breathing creature can survive at great low temperatures.
Sure.
Well, on that note, Jonathan, we're going to take our first break. This first hour has flown. So stay right where you are, everyone. We'll be right back after these messages. You're listening to Unknown Origins Radio. Don't go away.
Can't wait for Halloween to be scared? Coming this June to York, Pennsylvania, Phenomenology 107. The largest and most popular paranormal conference on the planet returns for its 7th straight year. Come meet some of the top paranormal researchers and experiencers in the field. Attend lectures by the real-life survivors of some of the most notorious hauntings in American history that inspired blockbuster movies such as The Conjuring, Haunting in Connecticut, and the Amityville Horror. Phenomenology 107 is coming to York, Pennsylvania, June 18th through the 21st at the York Holiday Inn and Conference Center. Tickets are now available at www.phenomevents.com. That's phenomevents.com. Happy haunting.
My life fades, my eyes dim. Yet I remember Wasteland Weekend. 4 days of Mad Max-inspired mayhem in the middle of the California desert. Camp out in a live, post-apocalyptic environment in our wasteland compound surrounded by specialty-built sets, vehicles, and performers straight out of Mad Max and other post-apocalyptic movies. This is an adults-only, fully costumed event that includes live bands and DJs, wasteland tribes such as the Mutant Hunters, Dukes of the Nuke, and the Juggers, Thunderdome, combat and stunt performers, post-apocalyptic vehicles, wasteland merchants in Bartertown, Wasteland Weekend, September 24th through the 27th in California City, California. Buy your tickets now at wastelandweekend.com. That's wastelandweekend.com.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Glenatide Publishing is proud to announce the release of our latest novel, The Demdike Legacy, by Barry Durham. Set in a quiet village in Lancashire, England, an enigmatic murder reignites a legacy of witchcraft thought to have died out 400 years before, when the Pendle witches were hanged at Lancaster Castle in 1612. As the death toll rises, the descendants of the original Pendle witches are forced out of hiding and assist the police in tracking down the killer before they are all wiped out. The Demdike Legacy is a thrilling mystery novel that blends modern detective work with old-world pagan practices. The Demdike Legacy is now available in both softcover and ebook formats on Amazon.com and at glenatide.com.
Make sure you tune in every Monday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Dark Matter Radio Network for Bill and Nancy Burns with Future Theater live. For the podcast, check out futuretheater.com.
You know what? I am sitting here talking to my mute button.
I was just getting ready to let you know that, Mark.
Way to go, Mark. Okay,
Yeah, well done.
Well, you know what? It's it wouldn't be Unknown Origins. Yeah, life goes on. So let me get back to it. Welcome back to Unknown Origins Radio. I'm Mark Johnson, along with Bruce Pearson, and our guest tonight is Dr. Jonathan Reed, author of the book Link, An Extraterrestrial Odyssey. And Jonathan, before we went to break, we were talking about how this creature that you had encountered in the forest had killed your dog, and you had brought it home, showed it to some people, trying to figure out what you're going to do, and then it wakes up. And at that point, what happens then, besides you completely freaking out?
I ran in the house and called my friend, who was so excited, about what he thought I'd found. And I said, Gary, we have a bigger problem. And he came over and he said, well, what? Somebody stole it. What? And I said, no. I said, it's alive. And of course, he didn't believe me. Again, he thought I was pulling his leg. I said, go look. Let's go out to the garage and look. I said, maybe it ran away, because the last time I saw it, it was like, coming out of the freezer. And he went out, and we opened the door to the garage and looked in there, and it jumped out the same way it did and screamed at him and me standing in front of it. We both let the lid slam down on its head and ran in the house, and both just sat there basically cowering, because this thing was incredibly powerful for being such a little, small in size creature, and it was like nothing I could ever imagine. It was powerful. This tone, this velocity of its voice had a power to it. It was like a weapon pushing us away, and just a terrible scream. And I actually was able to record part of that scream later on an audio tape. But all I can say is it scared the living daylights out of us, as well as everything else. And we thought, well, it's either going to run away or it's going to hurt us or something, or maybe we should put it down. Maybe it's a maimed animal now, and we should put it out of its misery. And this was, our thoughts flying through the air at the moment. And I said, well, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And Gary says, well, I'll do it. I'll go out and take a shovel, to it. And we were just thinking that it was going to, be in pain, be in suffering, and or that it was going to jump out and hurt someone. So that was the thought. As idiotic as it is, that was the thought. And so Gary went out and basically prepared with a blade shovel and was going to put it down. And he didn't. He couldn't do it because he went in there and opened the lid, and it literally just looked up at him. And he said, I can't do it. And it's intelligent. He said, there's an intelligence about it. And there was truly a feeling that it was more than just an animal, that there was an intelligence to it. And little by little, within the next few hours, we even sat in front of it with the door of the freezer open, where it would stick its head up and look around and look at us with these big, dark eyes, these big almond-shaped eyes, almost like it was asking for something or wanting us to do something. And within the next few days, I found myself sitting in front of the freezer and asking it questions, just saying, what can I do? That I'm sorry I hurt you, but you killed my dog. Trying to explain to it for maybe a cathartic reason in myself, just to try to rationalize what had happened. And little by little, I felt like it was listening. It was maybe not understanding, but it was aware that I was trying to communicate.
Were you feeling any feelings of anger towards it at this point because of what it did do to your dog? Or maybe if not even anger.
I had mixed emotions. It had killed my dog, and I was angry about that. But I was also angry that I had tried to kill it. And I was almost apologizing for it, for my own actions. And like I said, little by little, I felt like it was trying to understand. Or at least in my mind, I felt like it was. And then I started to feel that there was something else going on, like there was imagery being put in my mind of my own history, like when I was a young boy. And those feelings, those images were so vivid, it was almost like a motion picture being projected into my mind. And I later found out that that was part of his or its communication, because it started to communicate. It started to put imagery in my head of shapes and let's say a landscape that looked not familiar to me at all, but a geometry, a lot of geometric shapes that didn't make any sense to me. And little by little, I felt it was communicating.
Now, there was no further screaming episodes after that last one in the garage with your friend, Gary?
Well, there was one more after that, but it wasn't quite the same. I think it was fear. I think it was afraid of us. And I can say for good reason, hey, I tried to kill it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would engender a little fear.
That was my motivation.
Is it fair to say, though, that beyond that reactionary scream, it did not exhibit any aggressive behavior, like raising its hands or coming at you or that type of thing?
No, it never did. In fact, I know because I saw what it did to my dog. And I know it could have, by its own strength like an orangutan, that it probably could have reached out and literally tore me apart, because I saw that happen. So it never showed any type of aggression toward me.
And no further... I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, in fact, as time went by, the book that I wrote is about the first 9 days that I was actually with this thing in my home, in my garage. And close to the 8th day, I had actually tried to give it food. I had tried to give it anything that would help it and cause it to understand that I was not a threat. I tried dog food and all kinds of things, and it wouldn't eat anything. It would touch it. It might smell it, but it wouldn't eat it. It actually got out of the freezer and would sit kind of rocking back and forth on its haunches right in front of the freezer. And I finally put some water on the floor, and it drank some water. And that's the only thing that it ever took. And one day I put some water in a little metal cup and reached out as far as I could and handed it to it. And it touched my hand in taking the water and taking the cup, but it was so gentle, and it was watching my reaction when it touched me. So it was testing me.
Interesting.
And how did it feel when it touched you? What was the feel of its skin or temperature?
Well, it was very, very gentle. It just touched the outside of my fingers wrapped around this cup. And like I said, the material on its hands and on its body was like a skin-tight fabric. But during the topical examination, when I was actually able to feel the bone structure, I could feel that there were actually 5 fingers inside of this mitten-like glove.
Wow. There was no further contact with the vehicle, if you will, or the craft after that?
No. Well, the next day, my friend, gung-ho as he was, Gary, decided he'd take a truck and some chains and try to go up and bring it back, and it wasn't there. There was nothing there. In fact, some of the ferns that were underneath it that I had actually pulled out when I used the other branch to kind of go underneath it were almost like they had been replanted, or like the time had never happened.
Wow. Were you able to photograph or videotape any of these interactions between you and the creature in front of, rocking on its haunches, or any of that?
Yes, I was. I was able to photograph a lot of things.
Wow.
But as the story goes, during this 9-day period, somebody knocked on my door of my house in the afternoon, and there were 3 people there in suits.
Right. And, let's get into this.
And saying, Dr. Reed, we need to talk to you about what you found. And I said, I didn't find anything. And he said, we know you did. We know that it's very serious what you found, and you need to listen to what we have to tell you. And of course, I was angry and arrogant. And I didn't, still sick from what was going on. And I didn't want anybody poking into my business, into my house, my private life. But yet they knew. Somehow they knew. And I don't know if they'd monitored phone conversations. I don't know if they had found out through other people that had been in my house. But these people were eerily like Men in Black, like the description you hear of the agents who are very professional and very well-spoken, and every word formally introduced, almost in a hypnotic state, to where they're telling you, if you don't work with us, the next people that will come will tear your life apart.
And did they indicate at any time who they were with, or did you inquire as to
they said,
ID?
They said without any question, we are with a group called the School. And I said, what school? And they just continued with their diatribe of how this was going to ruin my life and ruin my family, and that nobody is ready and prepared to deal with this kind of thing, and neither was I. And they were right, but I wasn't going to concede to them. I was not going to fold And I said, I'm going to call the police. And they said, well, the police is with us. And I looked out my front door, and there was a police car sitting in front of their car.
And this was a state trooper car or a local police or sheriff?
It was the local Seattle police.
And the city of Seattle?
Yes.
Were you ever able to follow up on that and determine? Did you have the ability to say?
We inquired through people that I even personally knew who were Seattle police, and they said they had no indication that this had ever happened. I gave a copy of my videotape to a local television station, which was KIRO Channel 7 television in Seattle.
Which is a major station and a major news organization.
I had indicated what it was, and that this was something that I'd found, and that they could check and verify who I was. And within, I'd say, 2 hours of me dropping that off with a producer of the station, I got a call from the producer who said, Dr. Reed, I don't know what you're into, but your tape and everything else has been confiscated, and these guys are coming after you.
Wow. Well, that rings true to other incidents in my investigative experience and personal experience, too. So I can tell you that I don't dispute the validity of that statement at all.
Well, on the 9th day after bringing this thing home, after it waking up, after it proving to me and to friends who had seen it, alive and awake, I drove home to find 2 big vans in front of my house parked up in my yard, basically carting things out of my house. Men in like moving men clothes, like jumpsuits, taking hand trucks of things out of my house. Well, I didn't stop. I drove up to another friend's house and waited for a while and came back and found that my house had been ransacked. And not only had they taken most of everything in the house, but they had poked holes in the floor, in the plasterboard walls, in the ceiling, like they were looking for something, and systematically poking holes in the yard, in the grass, and taking the toilet off of the floor, leaving it just laying aside in the bathroom, and the sink removed from the wall, and the water running everywhere, and stove pulled out, refrigerator pulled out. I mean, just really ransacked the house. And I went to the garage, and the garage door wasn't just open. They had pried the whole door frame out of the garage.
Wow.
And, of course, the freezer was gone. And so were a lot of other things that didn't make any sense. Like there was a cord of wood chopped and piled up in my garage, and they took the whole cord of wood.
What?
Why would that be? It didn't make any sense. But the freezer was gone, so immediately I assumed, oh, well, they got them. They took them. And as I was looking, I saw some small, wet-looking footprints, kind of silvery, wet footprints on the floor. And they didn't go to the door or to the big door, the big garage door. They went directly to the wall, like he had walked right through the wall. And I had hoped he got away.
Well, I know a lot of other experiencers have reported that type of phenomenon, these beings being able to move through solid walls and windows.
Well, about 6 months later, I had left the country. My family was being harassed. My friends and houses were being broken into, and I was being run off the road several times. So I left Seattle and left the country for Vancouver, Canada. And I lived in my car for, on and off for about a year, homeless, no money, didn't know what to do. And one day I was in this kind of abandoned apartment that I had found to kind of live in temporarily. And this little guy, which we started calling Freddy, this little alien, just appeared in the corner of the room. And at first I thought, well, it's an illusion. It's just my mind playing tricks on me. But it wasn't. It just appeared like it just warped into my reality and literally walked over and sat in front of me, kind of rocking back and forth, just looking at me. And I could feel it scratching in my mind, almost like it was saying, I'm here, see me.
Could I interrupt for a second? Could we back up a couple steps? Because I want to, looking at this as an investigative journalist, after they not only burglarized your house, they ransacked it so it was uninhabitable. Did you file a police report at that time on that incident?
Let me tell you, much was happening so quickly. One day during the 9 days, when I first brought it home,
right,
my assistant that I worked with at the University of Washington Medical Center called me at home and said, Jonathan, are you changing departments? Are you moving? And I said, no. And he said, well, they've completely disassembled your office. And they've taken everything out of your office, all the computers, all your books, all your filing cabinets. I mean, they've taken your whole office apart. And I said, no, as far as I know, nobody told me. And later on, I called my own office and asked for Dr. Reed. And they said, we have no listing for a Dr. Reed. Now, I had worked there for over 11 years.
Jeez.
So
it's like you were erased.
Were told that if they talked about me, if they made any reference to me, that their job and their security of their family could have been in grave danger.
Well, we haven't heard this before, have we?
Oh, no.
That they could, in fact, be an accomplice to a major felony.
Yeah.
Now, I have had those friends of mine, people who worked with me, I have their testimonies on videotape. I've had them on Art Bell before.
Sure.
Some of them have traveled with me. I have substantial amount of credible information from other people who knew me, who knew I worked there. All of my credentials from my 2 universities was gone overnight, erased, absolutely unavailable.
Sounds like a Bob Lazar, actually.
Well, all I know is I had to go and find a couple of professors that actually I had classes with and get their testimony to prove, in fact, who I was, and that I did, in fact, graduate from San Diego State and from UCLA.
When they ransacked the house and they took everything, what happened to all the photos and videos and the evidence that you took of the creature during that time?
Well, luckily, about a day before that, my friend's house, Gary, somebody had broke into his house and did the same thing, but not as extensively, but just kind of went through everything. But it wasn't just a normal burglar, because he had money laying on his credenza that wasn't touched. He had all kinds of great stereo equipment that wasn't touched. All he took was his cameras and anything to do with film or videotape. That's what they took.
And yet they tore your...
At that point, he made a phone call to me. He said, take at least half of everything you've got and put it in the car, take it away, and go mail it to somebody. And I did. I mailed it out of the country, in fact. And that's the only material I have left. That's why about 60% of it is gone.
Wow.
Because when they came through my house, they took everything. They took everything.
Wow. Now, here you are, you're in Vancouver, living in an abandoned apartment, and
right.
This entity shows back up and appears to you. And what happens then?
Well, at that point, I halfway didn't believe it. I halfway thought, well, I'm just losing my mind because of everything that's happened. I mean, I've lost my life. I've lost my livelihood, which I was passionate about. I loved my job, and I was feeling very low, very abandoned, and didn't know where to turn, because every time I would turn somewhere, people would be attacked. My family, my friends, literally attacked.
By physically assaulted.
Yes. And so I decided that I was, the only real way to deal with this was to take me out of the equation. So that's why I left the country. And after living, homeless for almost a year, I was on the end of my ropes. And I got to the point where I was sitting in this basement without any electricity, without any money, without any real hope. And I had a gun in one hand and I had a phone number in the other. And I had been given this phone number during those 9 days by some people who just came up to me like in a store and said, Jonathan, you're not going to believe us, but you're going to need this phone number at some time, because you're going to need to trust somebody. Well, at that point, I didn't believe nor trust anyone, especially not people in a grocery store handing me some phone number. So luckily, I kept it. I put it in my wallet. I kept it. And now I was sitting, like I said, with a gun in one hand and a phone number. And I thought, well, I can shoot myself anytime and end this pain, but I might as well call the phone number just for curiosity's sake. And so I did. And the phone, I went to a payphone. I called this number, and the people answered and immediately said, Jonathan, what can we do to help you?
Like they were waiting for you.
They knew me.
Wow.
And I immediately hung up. I mean, I was paranoid. I was scared to death about what this was. So I waited for an hour, and I called back, and the same voice on the phone said, Jonathan, we're here to help you. What can we do? Tell us what we can do. Do you need money? Do you need a doctor? Do you need a place to live? And I was arrogant, and I said, fine, I need some money. Put some money somewhere, and I'll pick it up. So I gave them instructions of what to do. They followed it to the letter. I watched them put an envelope with money in a place where it was in public, open space, and they walked away. And I had told them, I said, if anybody's around there, I said, I'm not even going to call you or pick it up or nothing. But they did what I had asked them. They left me $300, and I picked it up, and there was a note inside that says, call us when you're ready.
Were you afraid at this point that these people were involved with these other people from the quote-unquote school?
Of course. I figured that's who they were, that they were baiting me. So I was as careful. I mean, I had the gun with me. I was ready to kill somebody if they walked up to me. And to make a long story short, when you lose your sense of reality, you don't care anymore about right and wrong. You just care about survival.
Exactly.
And I didn't care. I really didn't care, because my life was over as far as I knew. I had no home. I had no friends. I couldn't talk to my family. Nothing. And at that point, I was really struggling just to survive, just to eat. I mean, I was stealing food. I had lost like 75 pounds. And it was terrible. It was very, very traumatic.
This group,
they helped me. They proved to me that they did what they said they would do. And I called them about, 4 or 5 days later, and I said, I don't even know why I'm calling you. And they said, well, let's talk about it. And they were very careful and very gentle. They didn't force me to talk about anything I didn't want to, but they provided me with some comfort in saying, we know what you're dealing with. We've dealt with other people that have had these kind of experiences. We know that it's not comfortable for you, but we can help you. We can help you understand this if you want to. And they did. And they did.
What amazes me, what really interests me about this part of your story, and I read the part in the book where these people who had approached you, and to me it's very similar to what Stan and Lisa Romanek had dealt with Stan's story, because of this whole good and evil, black and white, shadow type government, and groups within groups. You have the negative ones, the men in black, the ones that make the experiencers' lives hell, and then there was there seems to be either a subgroup within there or a separate group of people who seem to help people like yourself within these situations.
Well, all I know is that both of those groups exist, and they both changed the reality of the way I was living. You know, one drove me to the brink of almost suicide, and the other brought me back. And I kept asking the question, why? Why are you doing this? Why do you care about me? And they said, it's not just you. It's that this is happening to many, many people all over the world. And that, you know, what you're going through is an important issue. Even though you may not think so, even though you may not even believe what has happened to you, it is an important issue. And little by little, they made me understand why it was important. It's important because it is happening to thousands of people. And that a lot of us don't come out. A lot of us don't ever talk about it. We're driven so far underground, either we just pretend it never happened, or we're convinced that if we ever talk about it, people will isolate us and, you know, call us insane, which a lot of times happens.
That's right.
But I was told that it was important for people to know that there are others that have experienced this, that we're not insane, and that there is a reality that we don't know about, that we've never given a chance to, at least myself, because it wasn't part of my life. It wasn't part of my paradigm. And over the last 18 years since that first encounter, like I just told you, he has come back. In fact, he's come back many, many times in front of me and in front of other people that know me.
Wow.
This is not a isolated issue. This has happened maybe more than 50 times in the last 18 years.
A couple follow-up questions, if I may, real quick. Did the helpful group, did they identify who they were? You were told the other ones were with the school. Who's this helpful group of people? Do you have any idea where they're from or what their makeup? Is it the same people you talk to each time?
No, it's not the same group as the negative people, obviously.
No, I understand that.
And it's also initially it was the same people I talked to.
Okay.
There was a confidence issue. They wanted to ensure that I stayed with the same people and that I became familiar with them. And at one point, they even said, "We know you have something, Jonathan. We know you have an artifact besides the creature. And if you ever, need help dealing with that," and of course I was paranoid, and I immediately thought, "Oh, they're going to take it. They're going to take it from me." And the one guy said, "Well, Jonathan, we'll show you ours if you show us yours." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he says, "Well, we've collected artifacts over the last 100 years."
Wow.
And some of them are broken, some of them are dismantled and not complete, and some are complete. And I said, "Fine, you show me yours, and then I will think about me showing you what I've got." And so they did. They took me in an airplane and flew to, all I can say is it was a deserty region, kind of like Arizona or New Mexico. that feeling. And we went into a car, and we went into a kind of a warehouse, small warehouse, and into an elevator, and they showed me some things that defy my understanding of reality. And objects that totally did not represent my way of science, my way of thinking. And it wasn't an illusion. It wasn't a projection. It wasn't a drug-induced state of mind. I was there physically. I saw these things. I touched some of them, and they were miraculous. I saw a thing that was the size of like a school bus. It was all made of something like glass.
Did any of these objects function?
Let's say.
I was asking, did any of these objects still function?
Yes. And when I touched the side of this glass sculpture, this glass object, it rippled in color, like it was feeling my touch. And the guy with me said, "Get angry and slap it." And I did. And it changed in color and its reaction as if it was reacting to my anger, my emotions.
Huh. The artifact that you found.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. And this is the name of the book. The book is called Link. And the device I call the Link artifact. It is a silver bracelet-type device that I've determined is worn on the wrist of the little guy that I found. We've determined that it does function. It is self-powered. It produces a pulse of radiation every quarter second. It has a silver surface with some hieroglyphs on it that are almost like buttons. They're a little bit raised from the surface, and they're black. I have no idea what those hieroglyphs mean. We've put it out to the public, to all kinds of people, to figure out what they mean. One of them is similar to the Egyptian hieroglyph for Ra or door. This device is very unique because I put it on the arm of the creature when he was unconscious, or when I thought he was unconscious.
Right.
And it's like a cuff. It's like a cuff, open-ended. And when I put it on its arm, it closed tightly around its arm on this black fabric. And it instantly turned dark, almost black, like the color of the fabric. When I touched the surface of it at one corner of it, it opened back up. Now, this material that it's made out of is it looks like stainless steel, but it's very, very light, very light. And there's pictures on Facebook and on the website of this. I took it to Japan, to a university, with the help of some other people, and they did some metallurgy on it, and they found that it was a unique blend of minerals and materials that we have here on Earth, but also some that are unknown. They have no idea what some of the materials are. It actually morphs itself from a solid state to this pliable state where it wraps itself around the arm. It has 3 needles inside of it that actually penetrate the wearer. And these needles are close to a ½ inch in length, and they're made out of gold. And at the end of each, the base of each gold needle, there is a round sphere of almost pure emerald, almost like a conductor, like an insulator.
Okay.
And all we can figure out is that this is a biological connection between the wearer and this cuff, this device, which is possibly a communicator, possibly a activator of some kind, or making the statement, maybe it's calling for help. Maybe it's calling to be activated. We don't exactly know.
So I have to ask the obvious question, have you ever worn it?
Yes, I have.
And what did you experience, if anything?
Well, I put it on one day. I don't know why. I don't have any idea why I actually did it. But it immediately morphed around my arm, around my left arm, my left wrist. It's very painful when the needles stick into your nerves, into your arm. But then it immediately turns cold, like frozen, within a couple of seconds. And the pain subsides. But then there is a vibration that starts in the center of your chest, almost like a rhythmic pounding that gets stronger and stronger, only similar to the thrombosis of a heart attack, that starts emulating from the middle of your chest to your extremities. Everywhere in your body, you feel this pounding and pounding, and it's painful. It's not gentle. It gets severe. And then my sight starts to become dim, almost like tunnel vision, but not completely black. And then all of a sudden, it's bright white again, and I'm standing in an egg-shaped room that's about 40 feet high and about 25 feet wide, and standing over the top of me from the side of this egg-shaped room is this column of energy that is oscillating in gold and yellows and oranges and has a sense of presence, has a sense of intelligence, almost like it's covered in a golden robe. And in that second, all I could feel was like I was in the presence of an angel. I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to leave that space. It was like, that's where I want to be.
Do you feel that this was a physical experience, like you were physically transported, or do you think it was more of something that you can liken to like a remote view or astral projection type of experience?
Well, I know it was physical because it's happened several times, and I've been able to test whether or not it's physical in several different ways. But one of them, even to the point where I could see there was grass and some dirt that had come off the soles of my shoe that were on the floor of this white room.
So you are being physically transported to another place, for lack of a better term.
Another place or another existence. Now, a lot of people have speculated, people who are really knowledgeable, that this device is probably a multi-dimensional exchanger or transporter, that it is actually using dimension to shift the reality.
And I tend to lean towards that theory myself over the last few years with my research. It just seems that, a lot of UFO researchers talk about, the extraterrestrials coming from another planet somewhere in the galaxy. And yet there seems to be more and more evidence that suggests that at least a portion of these beings that are visiting here are not coming from so far away. They could be coming like from arm's length away, but from a different dimension of reality.
Well, during the last 10 years, in traveling all over the world, I've been to 53 countries. I've talked to millions of people, publicly, personally, on the radio, on TV, all kinds of different things. And I was I've met a lot of very interesting people, and in 2005 I met a bunch of cosmonauts from Russia, people who are active cosmonauts, people who have been to the International Space Station. Marina Popovich I met, talked with for days in Peru. And about a year later, they invited me to Moscow because I became very good friends with them. And they showed me some things and asked me if I would be interested in helping them with a project that they have been working on. And the project they're working on is interstellar communication directly aimed at extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional races. They have made great strides. They have made great achievements. And I have become a consultant for this group by what I've learned and also by what I've learned from them. They believe that we are being visited by probably 24 different races from interdimensional places. And that some of them, and this is where you need to really extend yourself, some of them are from our future, our far, far, far vast future. And that maybe they are us in reality.
Yes, we've certainly heard that theory advanced before. So
and they're not coming back to save us from ourselves. They're not coming back to save the earth like ecologists wish they would. Probably what they're doing is their whole concept is to preserve life, all life. Because life in itself is a very precious thing. It's a spiritual, precious thing. Not spiritual as in organized religion, but spiritual as in there's an energy within ourselves, within life, that is very precious to them. And that's what they want to preserve, no matter which way it happens to evolve. They're not going to stop us from, ending ourselves. But what they've tried to do over the centuries is teach us things. And we have denied their teaching over and over and over again. They have sent messengers to us. They have sent writings to us. They have sent artifacts to us to give us a leg up. Sometimes we've cracked the surface and taken advantage of some of those little evolutionary steps. But most of the time we don't. We're in our own way most of the time. And that's sad.
Well, I'd like to go back, if I may, again, and not to shortchange that concept, because I think obviously that's the big picture. But I would like to follow up on two things. What in the intervening time has been your experience with the Men in Black? Have they stopped bothering you? Are they still following you?
Well, there's been. What's interesting is statistically, and I'm big on statistics, about 97% of the people that I've spoken to are open-minded, they're believers, they can conceive of what's happened to me, or they even factually know it because of their own experiences. 3% are non-believers, they're haters, and they're very vicious. About 1% is very vicious. There is a group, and I would say they're organized like a military group to basically attack and harass and discredit people who have real experiences that are really solid. Okay? And what's interesting is they don't attack the case. They attack the person. They harass you. They threaten you. I've been shot twice. I've been beaten up. My back was broke. numerous things over the last 18 years. I don't know why I'm even alive.
And yes, and I certainly, in doing our research and familiar with your story, obviously there's been the critics, but I think that you have, and I'm sure Art would agree with this, a lot more physical evidence than virtually any, with a few exceptions, any other cases. I think that evidence has to stand to back you up very strongly. Let me ask you something that perhaps you have been asked before, but in my many years of research since I started back in the 70s, quite by accident in Roswell, I had the opportunity about a year ago to have lunch with Jim Peniston, and if you review the case at Rendlesham, which I'm sure you're familiar with, the craft that they witnessed up close in the Rendlesham Forest in England seems strikingly similar to the craft that you described that you encountered. What has anybody presented that kind of a concept with you? Because I think that the shape of the craft, although yours seemed to be smaller, but I think that there's a striking similarity between those two craft. Have you been approached with that?
A year ago in June, August, I was in Rendlesham, and I spent some hours with the people there and went through the forest and talked at great length about this. I think there are some minor similarities, but I think when you really get down to the facts, it's quite different.
Okay.
But I will say that in talking with, the public for 18 years about this, I've had 50 or 60 people draw exactly what I saw in the forest before they'd ever seen any pictures of mine.
Wow.
So there's a lot of other people who've seen these, and I'll just call it like a pod obelisk shape. This black diamond laying on its side shape, marquee diamond shape. And so it's not that it's unusual. In fact, it's much more prevalent than one would expect. But it's ongoing. This is an ongoing situation. This is something that, again, I never would have believed, 18 years ago, but I certainly believe it now. And I know that the reality that we live in is not just the physical reality, but it's also a spiritual reality that blends with the physical, that time and dimension and space are ebbing and flowing ribbons within the universes, and that we cross over a lot of times partially by natural circumstances, and maybe these intelligent beings have learned to calculate how to use it to their own ability, their own credit.
Well, we're coming up to about less than 5 minutes left in the show, and I'd like to say now on behalf of Mark and I, we appreciate you coming in, but we also there's a lot more that needs to be said and discussed, clearly. We'd like to give you an offer to come back. We'd love to have you back and spend a couple more hours discussing this. Real briefly, I had the opportunity about 6 months ago to meet with him again, and I had worked about a year ago down in Austin with Jaime Maussan. Are you currently in contact with Jaime? And what is your going forward as a general question? What's next for you? Are you willing to continue this in a public fashion, or because of what you...
10 years ago, when I made the choice to, when I was invited to join this communications group as a consultant, I had pretty much decided to stop being part of the circus of UFOlogy, because I didn't have the feeling that there were a lot of people taking it seriously. And I made a choice. I made an active choice to provide my information when I had the ability, like on your show, to people who are genuinely interested and open-minded enough to listen. I have no problem, and I would love to come back on your show.
Thank you.
As far as, preaching about this, I never did that. I never tried to convince anybody Whether what happened to me is real or not, that's up to you to decide. If it hadn't happened to me personally, I wouldn't believe it either. And so my way of thinking is, look, I'm just presenting what's happened to me. It's fascinating. It's highly unusual, but it's also happening to many, many other people. I get 100 emails a week by people that are new contactees from all over the world who only want to ask for help and tell me, Jonathan, keep speaking for us. Keep talking for us. And that's probably one of the only reasons that I do. I am writing another book about all that's happened since those first 9 days. My original book is still available through Amazon. But there's a lot to be told. There's a lot more to know. And again, I appreciate you guys having me and taking the time and the courtesy to let me speak. And I would enjoy doing it again.
Well, we also want to point out that you will be back on the Dark Matter Radio Network in the next few months. I believe you are scheduled to appear back with Art.
Yes, Art had invited me to go back on when he comes back on, and we'll see how that all works out. But I look forward to that. Art was the original guy who broke this story. And then Jaime Maussan took it from there and took it into television. And then that all exploded, and it became a world thing. So all I can say is it's been a wild ride. I'm glad to be alive. There's a lot of people who have helped me along the way, who I really appreciate. And I thank God every day for this life and for the ability to maybe help others who have been through something like I have.
Well, thank you again for your time, and keep up the good work as best you can. And we, our job is to get that information out there and also to let the listeners decide on their own. But certainly the evidence that you have acquired as well as your story speaks quite strongly for the veracity of what you're saying. And we would like to have you back, and thank you for your time. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you both, and God bless you.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan.
To all your listeners.
Sure. And, thank you, everyone, for listening to another edition of Unknown Origins Radio. Tune in every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on the Dark Matter Radio Network, and we'll catch you all next week. Have a great one.
Thanks, Keith. Have a great one. Be safe, folks. See you next week.